Hi guys, welcome back. Tonight, we are going to talk about something quietly fascinating. As the world outside begins to dim, and the sounds of the day fade into a soft, distant hum, I invite you to settle into your blankets. Adjust your pillow, so that your neck feels supported, and your shoulders can finally drop away from your ears. We are going to spend some time tonight wandering through the past. But we are doing so in a way that is gentle, slow, and still. Tonight, we are turning our minds back hundreds of years to medieval Europe, to explore the quiet, steady ideas of beauty that governed the lives of the people who lived then. This is not a story of fast-moving trends or loud declarations. In the Middle Ages, beauty was something much deeper and more still than the fleeting fashions we see today. It was not about standing out or being an individual. It was about something much more permanent. It was about morality. It was about religion. It was about the simple, physical reality of survival. Beauty was a sign, a quiet whisper of one's place in the world and one's closeness to the divine. I want you to know, before we begin our journey, that nothing dramatic will happen in this story. There are no sudden turns, no loud voices, and no moments of tension. We are simply observing a slow-moving world, illuminated by nothing more than the soft glow of a beeswax candle. You can let your eyes close if they haven't already. You can let your breath become rhythmic and shallow, like the steady pulse of a sleeping house. There is nothing for you to do here but listen, and let the words wash over you like a cool, evening breeze. Breathe in the stillness. Breathe out the day. We are safe here, in the quiet corners of history. Imagine, if you will, a small town in the heart of the 14th century. It is late, perhaps the same time of night as it is for you now. The sun has long since dipped below the horizon, leaving the world in a deep, velvety blue. The streets are made of heavy, uneven stones that have been smoothed down by centuries of footsteps. In the dark, these stones hold a faint, cool dampness. There are no streetlights here. The only light comes from the moon, casting long, silver shadows across the timber-framed houses. Inside one of these houses, the world is even smaller and quieter. The walls are thick, made of stone and plaster that hold the chill of the night. On the floor, dried rushes have been scattered to provide a bit of warmth and a soft, crunching sound underfoot. In the corner of the room, a single candle flickers. The flame is small and amber, dancing slightly in a draft that no one can quite feel. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, old oak, and the clean, slightly sharp scent of beeswax. In this room, a woman is preparing for sleep. She moves slowly, her movements unhurried. There is a heavy wooden chest at the foot of her bed, its surface carved with simple, swirling patterns that feel rough and honest under her fingertips. She folds a linen cloth, the fabric cool and heavy in her hands. In this world, everything has a weight, everything has a texture. And in this quiet, candlelit space, we begin to understand how beauty was perceived. It wasn't just something you saw. It was something that lived in the order of things, in the medieval mind. The way a person looked was thought to be a direct reflection of their soul. They believed that a beautiful face was a gift from the heavens, a sign that the person inside was virtuous, kind, and pure. To be beautiful was to be good in a very literal sense. This is why their standards were so specific and so consistent. They weren't looking for variety. They were looking for a reflection of the divine order. One of the most important aspects of this, beauty perhaps the most vital, was the paleness of the skin. As you lie there, imagine a color so pale it looks like the surface of fresh milk, or the underside of a lily petal. This was the ideal for a noblewoman living in a castle or a manor house. Her skin was expected to be white, smooth, and untouched by the sun. But this preference for paleness wasn't just an aesthetic choice. It was deeply rooted in the structure of society. To have pale skin was to tell the world, without saying a word, that you did not have to labor in the fields. It was a sign of your class and your survival. Think of the sun in the Middle Ages. It was a constant, powerful force. For the peasants, the men and women who tilled the earth, planted the grain, and tended the sheep, the sun was a taskmaster. They spent their days from dawn until dusk under its wide, golden gaze. Their skin became bronzed, weathered, and lined. The sun left its mark on them, a permanent record of hard, physical toil. To be tanned or browned by the sun was to be a person of the earth, a person who worked with their hands to stay alive. But for the nobility, the goal was to remain as far from the sun's touch as possible. Imagine the interior of a great stone hall. Even at midday, the light is dim and filtered. The windows are narrow, letting in only thin shafts of light that dance with dust motes. The air inside is cool, even in the height of summer. The thick stone walls act as a barrier between the privileged and the harsh. Bright world outside, a noble woman would spend her hours in these shadows. She might sit by a window, yes, but she would be tucked away in the recess, her skin protected. When she did venture outside, perhaps to walk in a walled garden, she would wear heavy veils of fine linen or silk. She would wear wide-brimmed hats made of straw or felt. She was always covered, always shielded. Her skin remained white because her life was lived in the shade. It was a beauty of stillness, a beauty of being protected from the elements. This whiteness of the skin was often described in the poetry of the time with a sense of reverence. They spoke of foreheads like polished ivory and necks like swans. There is a quietness to those images. Ivory is cool to the touch. A swan moves slowly across a still pond. Everything about this ideal was meant to evoke a sense of calm, effortless grace. The skin had to be clear, too. In an age before modern medicine, a clear complexion was a sign of health and, by extension, God's favor. They believed that an inner sickness would eventually show itself on the surface. Therefore, a woman went to great lengths to keep her skin smooth. They used simple, earthy ingredients. They might wash their faces with rainwater gathered in a wooden barrel, or with milk that had been gently warmed over a fire. They used ointments made from crushed lilies or roots, stirred slowly in ceramic bowls until they became a thick, cooling paste. Everything was slow. There was no rushing to a store. If you wanted a cream for your face, you had to wait for the flowers to bloom. You had to harvest them by hand. You had to grind them with a mortar and pestle. The rhythmic thump-thump of the stone against stone becoming a sort of meditation. The process of beauty was as slow as the seasons themselves. As the night deepens in our medieval town, the silence grows heavier. You can imagine the sound of the wind softly brushing against the thatched roofs of the smaller cottages. In those cottages, the beauty standards were the same, even if they were harder to achieve. A peasant girl, working in the hay bales, might still dream of that lily-white skin. She might pull her hood low over her brow to catch a bit of shade. She might wash her face in the cold stream at the end of the day, hoping to scrub away the dust of the fields. Even in the hardest lives, there was a yearning for this quiet, pale ideal. Religion sat at the very heart of these ideas. In the medieval world, the church was not just a building. It was the rhythm of life. The bells marked the hours of the day, calling people to prayer and to rest, and the church had very specific ideas about what made a person beautiful. To the medieval mind, the ultimate example of beauty was the Virgin Mary. In the paintings and statues that filled the cathedrals, she was always depicted with that same serene, pale face. She was the star of the sea, the mystical rose. Her beauty was seen as the physical manifestation of her sinless nature. Because she was pure of heart, her face was perfectly balanced, her skin perfectly clear, her expression perfectly calm. Every woman was encouraged to look toward this divine model. But there was a delicate balance to maintain. While beauty was a sign of goodness, the pursuit of beauty through vanity was seen as a sin. This created a very quiet, modest approach to appearance. You wanted to be beautiful because it reflected a pure soul. But you must not seem as though you were trying too hard. There were no bright paints for the lips, or dark charcoals for the eyes in the way we think of them now. To use paint on one's face was seen as a form of deception, as if you were trying to hide the face God had given you. It was thought to be an act of pride. Instead, beauty was meant to be natural, even if that natural look required a great deal of staying out of the sun and washing with herbal waters. The church reinforced these ideals through the very architecture of the buildings. When you walk into a medieval cathedral, your eyes are drawn upward. The arches reach toward the ceiling in long, graceful lines. The light that filters through the stained glass isn't bright or blinding. It is soft, colored, and ethereal. This luminous quality was what people valued in beauty. They wanted a face that seemed to hold its own light, a face that was bright and clear. Before we continue our journey, take a moment to notice the stillness around you. If you have moved, or if your blankets have shifted, take a slow, gentle moment to settle back into place. Feel the weight of your limbs. Feel the way the bed supports you, steady and unmoving, much like the stone foundations of the ancient houses we have been visiting in our minds. In our last story, we sat together in the cool, dim light of a medieval chamber. We spoke of the beauty of pale-skinned skin like cream, or white lilies, or polished ivory. We imagined the lives of women who stayed in the shade of great stone walls to keep the sun from touching their faces, and how that paleness was a sign of a life lived away from the heat and the toil of the fields. We felt the peace of a world moved by candlelight and the slow turning of the seasons. Tonight, we are going to look closer, as the candle on the bedside table burns a little lower, its flame casting long, soft shadows against the tapestry on the wall. We are going to observe the fine details of the medieval face. We are going to look at the high foreheads, the thin, arched brows, and the small, quiet mouths that the people of that time thought were the height of grace and virtue. As always, there is no rush. Nothing exciting is going to happen. We are simply wandering through a gallery of still, painted faces, listening to the soft rustle of linen and the distant, muffled sound of the night wind. Breathe in the cool air of the past. Breathe out the noise of the present. Imagine now the face of a woman in the 14th century. She is sitting before a small, polished mirror made of silver or steel. The surface is not as clear as the mirrors we have today. It is a bit dark, a bit hazy, like looking into a deep, still pond at twilight. In the reflection, she sees her forehead. To us, it might look unusual, but to her, the forehead is the most important part of her face. It is the seat of the mind, the place where intelligence and spirit reside. In the Middle Ages, a high, wide, and clear forehead was considered the ultimate sign of beauty and high birth. It was thought to show a noble character and a spacious soul, but nature does not always provide such a feature. And so, in the quiet of her room, the woman performs a ritual that is slow, methodical, and silent. She takes a pair of small metal tweezers. They feel cold and heavy in her hand. One by one, with painstaking patience, she begins to pluck the hairs from her hairline. She is not just removing a few stray hairs. She is moving the entire hairline back, sometimes by an inch or more, to create that vast, smooth expanse of skin. Imagine the sound in the room. There is only the faint, rhythmic clink of the metal tool being set down, and the soft, shallow sound of her breathing. She does not flinch. She does not hurry. In this world, beauty is a form of discipline. To endure the sting of the plucking is a way of showing control over the body. It is a quiet, internal struggle. The skin at the top of her brow becomes red and tender, but she wipes it with a cloth soaked in cool rose water, the scent filling the small circle of candlelight with a heavy, floral sweetness. As you lie there, think about that stillness. Think about the patience required to shape oneself into an ideal, one hair at a time, while the rest of the world sleeps. This high forehead was more than just a fashion. It was a symbol of openness. It was thought that a person with a hidden forehead was hiding their thoughts, perhaps even hiding a sinful nature. A wide, bright brow suggested that there was nothing to conceal from God or from the world. Now, let your gaze wander down to her eyebrows. In the medieval ideal, eyebrows were not thick or bold. They were thin, delicate arches, like the fine lines drawn by a monk in a prayer book. They were so thin, in fact, that sometimes they were plucked away almost entirely, leaving only a ghostly suggestion of a curve. This gave the face an expression of eternal surprise, or perhaps eternal curiosity. It made the eyes look larger, more vulnerable, and more focused on the heavens. There is a gentleness to this look. Without the heavy weight of dark brows, the face appears lighter, as if it is floating in the dim light of the room. It is a face that does not frown. It is a face that does not show anger or intensity. It is a face of quiet, steady obedience. Obedience was a great virtue in the Middle Ages. It was believed that a woman's face should reflect her willingness to follow the path set out for her by her family and her faith. A face that was too busy, one that moved with too much emotion, or had too many deep lines of expression, was seen as a face that was troubled by worldly desires. Think of the paintings from this time. Perhaps you have seen them in books or in quiet museums. The faces are almost always still. The eyes look forward or slightly downward, with a calm, glassy stare. There are no wide smiles. There are no furrowed brows. The subjects look as though they are carved from stone or painted on silk, existing in a world where time has stopped moving altogether. This lack of emotion was intentional. To show great joy or great sorrow was thought to be a lack of balance. The medieval ideal was temperance, the ability to remain calm and steady, regardless of what was happening around you. When we look at these painted faces today, they might seem cold or emotionless, but to the people of the 14th century, they were a vision of perfect peace. They were the faces of people who had mastered their own hearts. As you rest your head on your pillow, imagine your own face becoming that still. Feel the muscles around your eyes relax. Let your forehead become smooth and wide in your mind. Imagine that any tension you are carrying in your jaw is simply melting away, leaving your mouth small and soft. The mouth, too, had its own ideal. In the Middle Ages, a beautiful mouth was small, like a rosebud. The lips were not full. They were delicate and pink, often held in a slight, modest line. A large mouth was seen as a sign of someone who talked too much, or perhaps someone who enjoyed food too much. To have a small mouth was to show that you were a person of few words and careful habits. Imagine the woman in our story. She does not use bright pigments to change the color of her lips. Instead, she might rub them with a bit of lemon peel or a damp cloth to bring a faint, natural flush to the skin. Everything is subtle. Everything is quiet. When she speaks, her voice is low, a soft murmur that barely carries across the room. She moves her lips as little as possible, preserving that sense of stillness that defines her entire being. This control of the face was a reflection of the control of the soul. There was a deep fear in the Middle Ages of looking sinful. It was believed that the devil could be seen in a person's expression, in a sly grin, a shifty eye, or a boastful laugh. Therefore, to be beautiful was to be readable and clear. You wanted your face to be a mirror of a pure heart, with nothing dark or twisted hidden behind the features. The church played a large role in reinforcing these ideas. In the great cathedrals, the statues of the saints stood in niches, their faces long and narrow, their foreheads high and smooth. They looked down on the worshippers with a sense of infinite patience. When a woman walked into the church, she saw these figures and recognized in them the same standards she tried to meet in her own mirror. Beauty was a bridge between the earthly world and the divine dot. Imagine the flickering light of the church candles reflecting off the gold leaf of an altarpiece. The faces of the angels are painted with those same thin brows and small red mouths. They do not look like individuals. They look like a single idea of perfection, repeated over and over again. This repetition was comforting. It suggested that there was a right way to be, a correct way to look, and that by following it, one could find a place in the eternal order of things. As the night continues to deepen, the room where our woman sits becomes even quieter. The fire in the hearth has burned down to a pile of glowing orange coals, occasionally settling with a soft, crunchy sound. The air is slightly cooler now, making the heavy wool of her gown feel even more comforting. She takes a small jar of ointment made from beeswax and almond oil. She rubs a tiny amount into her skin, her fingers moving in slow, circular motions. The oil catches the light, making her skin look luminous, as if she is glowing from within. This luminosity was perhaps the most prized quality of all. It wasn't just about the shape of the features. It was about the light they held. Think of the word fair. Today, we use it to mean many things, but in the Middle Ages, fair meant beautiful, light, and just. To be a fair lady was to be someone who embodied all the goodness of the world in her face. It was a word that felt like the morning sun hitting a white wall. It was bright, clean, and hopeful. As she finishes her ritual, she looks one last time into the darkened mirror. She sees a face that is a product of her culture, her faith, and her own patient hands. She sees the high forehead that marks her as intelligent and noble. She sees the thin brows that show her gentleness. She sees the small mouth that speaks of her modesty. She is satisfied, not out of vanity, but out of a sense of rightness. She has prepared herself for the world in the way she was taught. And now, she can prepare herself for rest. The medieval world was a world of symbols. Every flower in a garden, every animal in a forest, and every feature on a face had a meaning. Nothing was accidental. When someone looked at you, they weren't just seeing you. They were reading a story about who you were and what you believed. This gave a great weight to beauty. Tonight, we are continuing our slow walk through the medieval world. We have spoken of the pale, moon-like skin of the noble ladies, and we have looked closely at the high, clear foreheads that were so prized for their look of intelligence and purity. But tonight, we turn our attention to something that was considered both beautiful and dangerous, something that had to be handled with the utmost care. Tonight, we talk about hair in the Middle Ages. Hair was not just hair. It was a source of power, a symbol of status, and most significantly to the people of that time a source of great temptation. To let one's hair hang loose and uncovered was an act of immense intimacy, or a sign of wildness. It was something that belonged only to the young, or to the private spaces of the home. Far away from the prying eyes of the village or the court, imagine a room in a high stone tower. It is late, and the only sound is the low, rhythmic crackle of a fire in the hearth. The flames are orange and gold, casting long, dancing shadows that stretch across the heavy oak furniture and the thick wool tapestries hanging on the walls. In front of the fire, a woman sits on a low wooden stool. She has spent the day with her head covered, wrapped in layers of fine linen and silk. But now, in the privacy of her chamber, she is uncovering her hair. She reaches up and slowly, very slowly, unpins the brooch that holds her veil in place. You can almost hear the soft shush of the silk as it slides away from her head. Then, she begins to unwrap the wimple, the long band of white linen that covered her neck and chin. Layer by layer, the fabric is removed, and as it falls away, she feels the cool air of the room touch her skin. Now, she begins to unbraid her hair. Her fingers move with a practiced, repetitive motion, over and under, over and under. As the braids loosen, her hair begins to spill down her back like a heavy, silken cloak. Imagine the length of it. In this age, women rarely cut their hair. It grew for years and years, reaching down to their waists, their hips, and sometimes even to their knees. She picks up a comb carved from a single piece of dark buck. The teeth of the comb are smooth and rounded. She starts at the very bottom of her hair, gently working out the tangles. Brush, brush, brush. The sound is like the wind moving through dry grass. In the firelight, her hair catches the glow. If she is a noblewoman of the highest ideal, her hair might be the color of ripened wheat or spun gold. Blonde hair was the most desired color in medieval Europe. It was associated with light, with the sun, and with the golden halos of the saints. To have golden hair was to be seen as someone touched by the divine. It suggested a sweetness of character, a sunny disposition, and a soul that was transparent and good. As she brushes, the repetitive motion becomes a meditation. Brush, brush, brush. The golden strands shimmer and shift. She is not in a hurry. There is nowhere else she needs to be. The world outside the stone walls is vast and dark, but here, in the circle of the firelight, there is only the weight of the hair and the slow movement of the comb. But what of those with dark hair? In the medieval mind, dark hair was often seen as more mysterious, more grounded in the earth, while blonde was the color of the angels. Dark hair, the color of rich soil, or polished mahogany, or a raven's wing-reed, a different kind of beauty. It was a beauty of depth and shadow. In the flickering light of the fire, dark hair doesn't shimmer like gold. It glows with a deep, quiet intensity. It feels heavier, more substantial, yet, regardless of the color, all hair was seen as a potential snare for the soul. The church taught that a woman's hair was her crowning glory, but it was also a net that could catch the wandering eyes of men. Because of this, once a woman reached a certain age, or once she was married, her hair became a private thing. It was a treasure to be kept under lock and key, or, more accurately, under linen and silk. Think of the wimple. It is a garment that we mostly associate with nuns today, but in the Middle Ages, it was the standard dress for any respectable woman. It was a piece of white linen that was wrapped under the chin and pinned at the top of the head, covering the neck completely. Over this, a veil was draped. Imagine the sensation of wearing a wimple. The linen is crisp and cool against the jaw. It limits the movement of the head, encouraging a posture that is upright and dignified. It creates a frame for the face, focusing all the attention on those features we talked about before: the high forehead, the thin brows, the small mouth. By covering the hair and the neck, the woman was signaling her modesty and her place within the social order. She was saying, "My beauty is not for the world to consume. It is reserved." The veils themselves were works of quiet art. For a peasant woman, the veil might be a simple square of coarse, unbleached linen, tied simply to keep the dust of the fields away. But for a lady of the court, the veil was a cloud of gossamer silk, so thin it was almost transparent. It might be edged with a tiny, delicate fringe of gold thread that caught the light whenever she turned her head. As you lie there, imagine the weight of these head coverings. They weren't just clothes. They were an architecture of the body. There were crested veils that stood up high, supported by wires or padded rolls. There were butterfly veils that spread out wide like wings. They transformed the shape of a woman's head into something sculptural, something grand and slow. You could not run in a butterfly veil. You could not turn your head quickly. You had to move with a measured, rhythmic grace. The repetition of the layers, the cap, the wimple, the veil, the pins was a ritual performed every morning and reversed every night. It was a way of marking the boundary between the public self and the private self. When the veil was on, the woman was a symbol of her family, her status, and her faith. When the veil was off, she was simply herself, sitting by the fire, brushing her hair in the dark. Brush, brush, brush. The fire is beginning to die down now, the bright flames giving way to a deep, pulsing red. The room is growing cooler, and the shadows are reclaiming the corners. The woman sets down her comb. She runs her hand over her hair, feeling the smoothness of it, the quiet electric hum of the strands. This is the only time of day when she feels the true weight of herself. But men, too, were part of this world of hair and meaning. While they did not cover their heads with veils, their hair and beards were subject to the same slow-moving tides of fashion and morality. In the early Middle Ages, long hair on a man was a sign of kingship and warrior strength. To have one's hair cut short against one's will was a profound humiliation. It was a way of unmaking a man's power. Imagine a knight, his hair falling in thick heavy waves to his shoulders. His hair is not fine like the ladies'. It is thick and strong, perhaps a bit weathered by the wind and the rain of his travels. He, too, sits by the fire, perhaps running a hand through his beard. Beards were symbols of wisdom and maturity. A full, well-tended beard suggested a man who was settled, a man who had seen the world and understood its gravity. The beard was the mane of the human male, a sign of his virility and his place as a protector. But even beards changed with the centuries. Sometimes they were grown long and forked, groomed with scented oils made of cloves and sandalwood. At other times, the fashion turned toward the clean-shaven face, revealing the jawline and the neck, suggesting a more youthful, clerical kind of beauty. Think of the texture of a medieval beard. It wasn't the perfectly trimmed beard of a modern shop. It was more natural, more rugged. It smelled of wood smoke, of old leather, and of the cold, crisp air of the outdoors. It was a part of a man's identity, as much as his sword or his shield. As the knight sits in the shadows, he might use a small comb to straighten his mustache. The movements are slow. The world is quiet. There is no need for many words between the man and the woman in this room. They are both part of a world where appearance is a language of silence, of fabric, and of hair. In the monasteries, the monks practiced a different kind of hair ritual. They shaved the tops of their heads, leaving only a ring of hair. This was a physical mark of their vow, a way of opening the top of the head to God, much like the high foreheads of the ladies. It was a beauty of renunciation. By giving up their hair, they were giving up their vanity and their connection to the world of temptation. Imagine the cold stone of the monastery floor, and the rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape of the razor as the monks prepared for their morning prayers. It was a different kind of stillness, a beauty of bone and shadow. But back in our stone chamber, the lady has finished her brushing. She takes a soft ribbon of silk and ties her hair back loosely so it won't tangle while she sleeps. Her movements are heavy with the onset of rest. She looks at the pile of linen on the table, the wimple, and the veil that she will put back on when the sun rises. They look like white ghosts in the dim light. There is a peace in knowing that everything has its place. The hair is covered during the day to preserve modesty and order. It is uncovered at night to provide comfort and connection. The colors of the hair, the gold, the brown, the black are all part of a larger tapestry of meaning. As you feel yourself drifting deeper into your pillows, let the image of the long, flowing hair fade into the background. Think instead of the silence that follows the brushing. The fire is now just a few glowing embers. The room is dark. The air is still. I hope you are feeling heavy and relaxed. Perhaps your eyes are already growing a bit tired, and the weight of your blankets feels like a warm, protective shell around you. Before we continue, I want you to take a slow, deep breath. Feel the air enter your lungs, and as you breathe out, imagine you are releasing all the tension of the modern world. Every deadline, every light, every noise, just let it drift away. Tonight, we are stepping back into that stone chamber we visited before. The fire we watched in our last story has burned down to a pale, gray ash, and the room is filled with the soft, blue-gray light of a very early morning. The sun has not yet risen over the distant, forested hills, but the world is beginning to wake in its own quiet way. We have explored the pale skin of the medieval world, the high, intellectual foreheads, and the long, secret tresses of hair. But now, as the lady of the house rises from her bed of feathers and straw, we are going to observe the slow, rhythmic ritual of dressing. We are going to feel the weight of the fabric, hear the rustle of the linen, and understand how the very shape of the body was a reflection of the soul's discipline in the Middle Ages. Clothing was not something you threw on in a hurry. It was a series of layers, each one serving a purpose, each one adding to the weight and the dignity of the person wearing it. Imagine the lady standing on the rush-covered floor. Her feet are bare, and the cool dampness of the stone beneath the straw sends a faint shiver of wakefulness through her. The first thing she reaches for is her chemise, or her smock. This is the layer that sits closest to the skin. It is made of linen, fine, hand-woven linen that has been bleached in the sun until it is the color of a summer cloud. Think of the texture of that linen. It is not like the soft, thin cotton we know today. It has a slight weight to it, a crispness that softens as it warms against the body. When she pulls it over her head, there is a soft, muffled whoosh of fabric. The sleeves are long and wide, and the hem reaches down to her ankles. This layer is never seen by the public. It is a barrier between the body and the heavier outer garments. It absorbs the oils of the skin and the sweat of the day, keeping the expensive wools and silks clean in the quiet of the morning. The sound of the linen brushing against itself is like a whisper. It is the sound of a secret. The chemise is loose and flowing, but that is about to change. In the medieval world, the shape of the body was a matter of great importance. Today, we often think of beauty as something purely aesthetic, but to the people of the 14th and 15th centuries, the shape of a person's silhouette was a map of their character. Specifically, thinness was highly valued among the nobility, but this wasn't the thinness of modern athletics. It was a thinness of discipline. A slender, upright body was a sign that a person was not a slave to their appetites. Gluttony was a grave sin, and a body that appeared heavy or soft was sometimes thought to reflect a soul that was equally soft and undisciplined. To be thin was to show that you had the spiritual strength to fast, to pray, and to control your earthly desires. And so, the next layer of clothing was designed to create this sense of containment. This was the cot, or the kirtle. This garment was made of more substantial fabric, perhaps a fine, tightly woven wool or a heavy silk. It was cut to fit the torso as closely as possible. Imagine the lady's servant, or lady-in-waiting, stepping behind her. In this world, you did not dress alone if you could afford help. It was a communal act, a quiet exchange of hands and breath. The cot had long rows of laces, either down the front or along the sides. Creak, pull, creak. The laces are made of sturdy silk cord or leather thongs. One by one, the servant pulls them tight. You can hear the sound of the cord sliding through the metal or thread-worked eyelets. With every pull, the lady's torso is drawn in. This was an early form of the corset, though it didn't use the heavy whalebone or steel of later centuries. Instead, it relied on the strength of the fabric and the tension of the laces to smooth the lines of the body. As the laces tighten, the lady's breath becomes shallower. Her posture shifts. She cannot slouch in a cot that is properly laced. Her shoulders are pulled back, her chest is lifted, and her spine becomes a straight, elegant line. There is a sense of being held by the clothing. It is a physical reminder to remain upright, both in body and in spirit. Think of that feeling of restriction. It isn't meant to be painful. It is meant to be a support. It is a cocoon of fabric that tells the body how to behave. In the medieval mind, a body that was loose was a body that was vulnerable to temptation. By lacing the body tight, the person was signaling that they were in control of themselves. They were contained. The weight of the clothing is starting to grow now. Over the cot might go a second kirtle, or perhaps a surcoat. This outer layer is where the wealth of the family is truly shown. Imagine a heavy, dark blue wool, dyed with woda plant, that produces a deep, velvety color. The wool is thick and warm, meant to keep out the damp chill of the stone castle. When the lady moves, the heavy skirts of the surcoat make a slow sweeping sound across the floor. Swish, swish. It is a rhythmic, grounding sound. Because the skirts are so long and the fabric is so heavy, she cannot move quickly. She cannot run. She cannot take long, hurried strides. This restriction of movement was an essential part of medieval grace. To be noble was to be slow. If you were in a hurry, it meant you were a servant, someone who had a task to finish, someone who was at the beck and call of another. But a lady of status had no reason to rush. Her movements were measured and deliberate. The weight of her skirts dictated the pace of her life. Imagine her walking down a long stone corridor. The sun is just beginning to hit the high windows, sending shafts of dusty gold light across the floor. She glides rather than walks, because her torso is held so firmly by the laces and her skirts are so heavy. Her upper body remains almost perfectly still while she moves. It gives her the appearance of a statue in motion, a calm, unruffled presence in a world of stone and shadow. The sounds of the clothing are a symphony of textures. There is the soft thud of her leather shoes, which have no heels and are as flexible as gloves. There is the clink of the silver or brass girdle around her waist, a heavy belt that hangs low on her hips, weighted down by a small embroidered pouch or a set of keys. There is the rustle of the silk veil we talked about before, pinned carefully to her hair. Everything about her dressing ritual has been an act of narrowing. She has narrowed her body with laces. She has narrowed her movements with heavy fabric. She has narrowed her focus to the quiet, dignified path she must walk through the day. As you listen to these descriptions, I want you to feel that same sense of containment. Imagine that your own blankets are like those layers of medieval wool. They are heavy, they are warm, and they are holding you in place. You don't need to move. You don't need to rush. You are perfectly supported, perfectly still. Think about the discipline of that medieval life. We often think of the past as a time of chaos. But for the people living in these layers of cloth, life was a series of very strict boundaries. There was a right way to dress, a right way to stand, and a right way to breathe. There is a strange kind of peace in that much structure. You always know who you are and what is expected of you. The fabrics themselves were a connection to the earth. The wool came from the sheep that grazed on the nearby hills. The linen came from the flax plants that grew in the river valleys. The dyes came from roots and insects and leaves. When you wore a medieval gown, you were wearing the landscape. You were wearing the labor of the spinners, the weavers, and the dyers who had worked for months to create a single garment. Imagine the smell of a heavy wool gown. It smells slightly of the sheep it came from, a warm lanolin scent that is earthy and rich. It smells of the wood smoke from the great hall. It smells of the dried lavender that was placed in the wooden chest where the gown was stored over the winter. It is a deep, comforting smell, the scent of a world that is slow and honest. As the lady finishes her dressing, she looks at herself in the small dark mirror. She is no longer just a woman. She is a silhouette. She is a collection of colors and shapes that tell a story of status, of faith, and of discipline. She feels the weight of the fabric on her shoulders, a constant, gentle pressure that reminds her of her place in the world. She takes a slow breath, her chest rising against the laces of her cot. The restriction of the garment makes her mindful of every breath. It makes her mindful of her own presence. And now, as she prepares to step out into the day, we are going to leave her there, in that moment of quiet readiness. The sun is now a thin, golden line on the horizon, and the birds in the castle eaves are beginning to chirp. But in our minds, we can stay in the stillness. We can stay with the feeling of the heavy blankets and the quiet room. We can stay with the memory of the laces creaking and the silk rustling. We have traveled through the skin, the face, the hair, and the clothing. We have seen how the medieval people built their world out of layers of meaning, layers of fabric, and layers of silence. Tonight, we return to our medieval chamber. We have seen the layers of wool and linen, the high foreheads, and the long, hidden hair. But as the lady of the house sits in the deep silence of the night, we are going to look at the rituals that took place before the clothes were even donned. We are going to explore the quiet, often misunderstood world of medieval hygiene and the delicate, dangerous art of the pale mask. There is a common story told today that the people of the Middle Ages lived in a world of constant grime, that they never bathed, and that they moved through a fog of unpleasantness. But as we sit here in the amber glow of our imaginary candle, we can see that the truth was much more careful, much more deliberate. Their ideas of cleanliness were not our own, but they were deeply felt. They were rituals of the hand and the cloth, performed in the hush of the morning and the heavy air of the evening. Breathe in, breathe out. Imagine a large wooden basin sitting on a low table. The wood is oak, dark and polished by years of use. It holds a gallon of water that has been warmed over the hearth. You can hear the soft slosh of the water as a servant pours it from a ceramic pitcher. The steam rises in thin ghostly ribbons, curling into the cold air of the stone room. For the medieval person, cleanliness was a matter of the visible. To have clean hands and a clean face was a sign of respect for oneself and for God. They believed that the soul was reflected in the skin, and therefore, to be dirty was to be spiritually negligent. But they did not always believe in the total immersion of the body. There was a quiet fear associated with the bath. Imagine the heavy wooden tub, lined with a large linen sheet to protect the skin from splinters. To fill such a tub was a labor of hours. Water had to be carried from the well, bucket by bucket. It had to be heated over a fire. But more than the labor, there was a belief in the opening of the pores. They believed that hot water and steam opened the body to the air, and that the air, especially if it was foul or corrupt, could carry sickness deep into the organs. To bathe too often was to risk the integrity of the body's shell, and so, the bath was a rare, slow, and momentous occasion. It was a luxury of the body, but also a risk to the health. Instead, they practiced the art of the dry wash and the linen rub. As you lie there, imagine the feeling of a piece of rough, clean linen. A woman would dip the corner of this cloth into the warm water of her basin. She would rub her face, her neck, her hands, and her arms. The friction of the linen against the skin was thought to pull away the impurities. It was a rhythmic, scratching sound. Rub, rub, rub. The skin would flush a soft pink, the blood coming to the surface. To them, this was the height of hygiene, the mechanical removal of the world's dust. Without the danger of the open pore, this focus on the linen was vital. In the Middle Ages, the cleanliness of a person was often judged by the whiteness of their undergarments. If your chemise was white and crisp, it meant you were clean. The linen acted as a sponge, pulling the oils and the salt from the body. Every night, that linen was removed, and every morning, a fresh, sun-bleached layer was put on. It was a cycle of renewal, a way of staying pure through the layers of one's dress. But we must also talk about the scent of this world. In a world without modern plumbing, the air held a different character. But it was not a world of unmitigated smells. It was a world of masking and sweetening. In the rushes on the floor, the servants would scatter dried herbs, meadow, sweet, lavender, and mint. Every time someone walked across the room, the stems would crush underfoot, releasing a tiny puff of herbal fragrance. Crunch, scent, crunch, scent. It was a low-level perfume that lived in the very floorboards. The lady of the house would carry a pomander, a small, perforated ball of gold or silver hanging from her girdle. Inside the pomander was a wad of wax mixed with precious spices, cloves, cinnamon, musk, and ambergris. As she moved, the pomander would swing gently against her skirts, releasing a warm, spicy cloud that traveled with her. Imagine the scent of cloves in a cold stone room. It is sharp and comforting. It is a reminder that even in the heart of winter, there are spices from faraway lands that can warm the air. But now, we must look at the most delicate part of the evening ritual. The lady sits before her silver mirror. Her face is clean from the linen rub, but she desires that perfect, celestial paleness we have spoken of before. She reaches for a small ceramic jar. The lid is heavy and fits tightly. Inside is a paste known as ceruse. Ceruse was the most prized cosmetic of the Middle Ages. It was a thick white ointment made by suspending lead in vinegar and letting it sit until it formed a crust. This crust was then ground into a fine powder and mixed with water or oil to create a paint. As you listen, imagine the lady taking a tiny amount of this white paste onto her fingertips. It is cold, it is heavy. She begins to apply it to her forehead, moving in slow, circular motions. She spreads it over her cheeks, down the bridge of her nose, and over her chin. The ceruse is not like modern makeup. It doesn't sink into the skin. It sits on top of it, creating a mask that is as smooth and white as a piece of marble. It covers every freckle, every vein, every sign of the sun. In the candlelight, her face begins to transform. She is no longer a creature of flesh and blood. She is becoming an icon. She is becoming the lily-white ideal. But there is a tragedy in this beauty that the medieval world only dimly understood. The lead in the ceruse was a poison. As it sat on the skin, hour after hour, it was slowly absorbed. Over years of use, it would turn the skin gray. It would cause the teeth to loosen. It would make the hair thin. And yet, she continues. She applies the powder with a steady hand. In her mind, the risk is a quiet sacrifice for the sake of the ideal. To be beautiful is to be virtuous, and to be virtuous, one must be pale. The whiteness of the lead is a physical manifestation of her purity. She takes a small piece of silk and buffs the powder until it has a slight sheen. The face she sees in the mirror is now a fair face. It is a face that does not move. Because the ceruse is thick and prone to cracking, she must keep her expression still. She cannot laugh heartily. She cannot scowl. She must exist in a state of eternal, frozen grace, stillness, paleness, silence. Think of the patience required to live behind such a mask. Think of the way it dictates the way she breathes, the way she speaks, and the way she thinks. She is a prisoner of her own beauty, held in place by a layer of lead and vinegar. Beside the jar of ceruse is another small container, this one holding a powder made from crushed roots or dried insects. This is the rouge. She takes a tiny amount, hardly more than a grain of sand, and dabs it onto the center of her cheeks. It is a faint, ghostly pink, like the first hint of dawn on a snowy field. It provides the only contrast to the white mask, a sign of life in a face that has been made to look like stone. She also uses a small brush to apply a wash of egg white over her forehead. As it dries, the egg white tightens, pulling the skin smooth and giving it a luminous glaze. In the flickering light of the candle, her forehead shines like polished bone. This was the medieval glow. It wasn't the glow of health or sweat. It was the glow of a shell, a carefully constructed surface that protected the soul from the world. As she finishes her preparations, the room is filled with the scent of the vinegar from the ceruse, the lavender from the rushes, and the cloves from her It is a complex, heavy atmosphere. She wipes her fingers on a linen cloth. The white stains of the lead powder remain on the fabric, a ghostly reminder of the mask she now wears. She is ready. She has cleaned what must be cleaned. She has masked what must be masked. And she has painted what must be painted. Now, imagine her standing up. The weight of her heavy wool skirts pulls at her waist. The laces of her coat hold her ribs in a firm grip. Her hair is bound under her veil. Her face is a white, still mask. She moves toward her bed. Even in sleep, some of these women would try to keep their faces still, fearful of rubbing the expensive and laborious powder onto their pillows. They would sleep on their backs, their heads supported by firm bolsters, their hands folded over their chests. As you lie there now, feel the difference between your world and hers. You do not have to wear a mask. You do not have to fear the open pore. You can breathe deeply. You can let your face relax into whatever shape it wants to take. Your skin is just skin warm, breathing, and free. But there is something soothing in the thought of her ritual. The repetition of it. The slow, deliberate care she took with herself. In a world that could be harsh and unpredictable, these small acts of grooming were a way of reclaiming order. They were a way of saying, I am here. I am disciplined. I am beautiful. The silence of the medieval night is very deep. Outside the window, the owls are calling to one another in the dark woods. The wind is hushing through the dry grass of the castle moat. Inside, the candle has reached the end of its wick. The flame gutters, dancing one last time before it vanishes into a tiny curl of smoke. The lady is asleep. Her white face is a pale moon in the darkness of the room. She is breathing slowly, the linen of her chemise rising and falling in the shadows. In the Middle Ages, the world was seen as a great, living tapestry, woven by a divine hand. Every thread had its place. The gold threads stayed at the top, the sturdy wool threads formed the base, and the colored silks filled the patterns in between. To the medieval mind, a person's appearance was the physical manifestation of this divine order. Beauty was not just a matter of luck or vanity. It was a marker of class. Imagine walking into a crowded market square on a crisp autumn morning. The ground is cold and damp, scattered with straw and the occasional fallen leaf. As you look around, you don't just see a crowd of people. You see a clear, visual map of the social hierarchy. You can read every person as easily as you might read a book. The noblewoman, whom we have visited before, moves through the crowd like a ship made of silk. Her beauty is a beauty of exclusion. Every part of her appearance tells you what she does not do. Her skin is pale because she does not labor under the sun. Her hands are soft and white because she does not handle the plow or the loom. Her clothing is voluminous and restrictive because she has servants to do the heavy lifting of life for her. Contrast this with the peasant woman selling eggs in the corner of the square. Her beauty is of a different kind of beauty, of utility and the earth. Her skin is the color of a hazelnut, bronzed by years of working in the fields. Her hands are wide and strong, the nails short and stained by the soil. Her clothing is cut, close to the body, made of sturdy, rough-spun wool that doesn't catch on the brambles or the farm tools. In our modern world, we celebrate the idea that anyone can be anything. But in the Middle Ages, the beauty of the system was thought to be in its stability. Everyone had a place, and everyone's appearance served to confirm that place. It was a visual language of belonging, the weight of law. Sumptuary statutes now imagine that this visual order was not just a tradition, but a law. These were called sumptuary laws, or the statutes of apparel. As the night grows deeper, and the fire in our imaginary hearth settles into glowing coals, think of the kings and lords who sat in their high halls, worried that the lines between the classes were becoming blurred. In the later Middle Ages, as merchants began to grow wealthy from trade, they started to buy the fine silks and furs that had once been reserved only for the nobility. This caused a great deal of anxiety among the ruling class. If a merchant could look like a lord, how would anyone know who was truly in charge? To prevent this, laws were passed that dictated exactly what you could wear based on your income and your birth. The colors. Certain dyes were so expensive that they were restricted by law. A deep, rich crimson, made from thousands of tiny crushed insects, was often reserved for the highest nobility. A commoner found wearing such a red could be fined or even imprisoned. The furs. Fur was the ultimate sign of status. A queen might wear ermine, the white winter coat of a weasel with its tiny black tail tips. A merchant's wife might be allowed only the fur of a squirrel or a lamb. A peasant would wear the rough hide of a sheep or a goat, the wool turned inward for warmth. The fabrics, silk, velvet, and cloth gold, were the provinces of the elite. The lower classes were restricted to wool and linen. Even the quality of the wool was regulated. A knight could wear a fine broadcloth wool, while a laborer was restricted to russet, a coarse, unbleached, undyed cloth that was the color of dry earth. As you lie there, imagine the sound of these fabrics. The silk of the nobleman makes a sharp high-pitched rustle as he walks. The heavy wool of the peasant makes a low, muffled thump. The sound of the crowd in the market square was a symphony of these different textures, each one telling the story of a person's bank account and their bloodline. Let's look closer at the noble ideal. We have spoken of the high forehead and the pale skin, but there was also the matter of posture and movement. A noble person was expected to move with a quality called unhurriedness. In a great stone hall, lit by the flickering orange light of torches, a lord sits at his table. His gown is so long that it pools around his feet. His sleeves are so wide and heavy that they hang down past his knees, often lined with a contrasting color of silk. These sleeves are a masterpiece of uselessness. They are beautiful specifically because you cannot do any work in them. They would get in the way of every task. To be noble was to be a creature of leisure and contemplation. Your beauty was a sign that you were supported by the labor of others, allowing you to focus on the higher things: law, war, and prayer. The visual hierarchy extended even to the face. It was believed that a noble person had finer features, a narrower nose, a smaller mouth, more delicate ears. This was thought to be a result of generations of refined living. When a medieval poet described a hero, they didn't just say he was brave. They described his noble countenance, as if his bravery were written in the very shape of his jawline. Now, turn your mind toward the village. The sun is setting over the thatched roofs, and the smell of wood smoke and damp hay is thick in the air. The peasant man returning from the fields is covered in the dust of his labor. His skin is weathered, his muscles are thick and hard, and his back is slightly bowed from years of lifting. In the eyes of the nobility, this man was not beautiful in the classical sense. But within the village, there was a different standard of beauty, a beauty of strength and health. A young woman with bright, clear eyes, a strong frame for childbearing, and the stamina to work the harvest was highly prized. Her beauty was one of vitality. Her clothing was a masterpiece of practicality. She might wear a kirtle of sturdy russet wool, with sleeves that could be unpinned and rolled up when she needed to wash the clothes in the stream, or knead the heavy dough for the week's bread. Her apron was made of heavy linen, stained by the berries she gathered, or the grease of the hearth. There is a quiet, rhythmic beauty in this life of the earth. The peasant's appearance was a reflection of the seasons. In the winter, they were bundled in layers of gray and brown wool, smelling of the sheep. In the summer, they were stripped down to their linen shifts, their skin turning a deep, golden brown. They were the roots of the tree, while the nobility were the blossoms. Both were necessary, and both were beautiful in their own distinct ways. As the night continues to stretch out, imagine the merchant. This is a person who lives in the tension between the two worlds. He lives in a timber-framed house in the city, with glass windows and a carpet on the floor. He has money, sometimes more money than the lords who look down on him. The merchant wants to be beautiful. He wants to show his success, but he must be careful. If he wears a fur that is too fine, he could be hauled before a judge. If his shoes are too long, pointed shoes called poulaines were a major fashion, trend and heavily regulated. He could be mocked by the knights. The merchant's beauty is a beauty of sober wealth. He wears high-quality wool, but in dark, serious colors like charcoal, deep burgundy, or navy. He uses buttons, a relatively new and expensive invention made of silver or bone, but he keeps them in a neat, orderly line. His appearance is meant to say, I am a man of business. I am reliable. I am wealthy, but I know my place. This tension created a constant game of cat and mouse between the classes. As soon as a merchant found a way to look like a lord, the lords would change the fashion, creating a new, even more expensive, or impractical trend that the merchant couldn't easily copy. It was a slow-motion race of silk and velvet, played out over decades. As we sit in the dark of our medieval chamber, the distinctions of class begin to fade. When the sun goes down and the candles are extinguished, the silk and the russet wool both feel the same in the dark. The noble woman and the peasant girl both lie down on their beds, their bodies tired from the day's distinct burdens. The visual hierarchy was a way for the medieval world to make sense of itself during the waking hours. It was a way to ensure that every person knew where they stood and who they were. It provided a sense of security, a feeling that the world was an orderly place, governed by rules that were as visible as the colors of the rainbow. But at night, that order is suspended. In the silence of the sleep, there is no hierarchy. There is only the breath, the heart, and the dream. Imagine the merchant's silk gown hanging on a peg. Imagine the peasant's wool tunic folded on a wooden chest. In the moonlight, they both cast the same shadow. The beauty of the day, the pale skin, the bronzed arms, the high forehead is hidden by the velvet darkness of the night. The slow transition as you feel your eyes becoming heavier. Imagine the town going to sleep. The market square is empty now. The straw on the ground is still. The colorful banners of the nobility are no longer snapping in the wind. They hang limp and silent in the cool night air. The hierarchy of the world is resting. The laws of what you can wear and how you must look are tucked away in the scrolls of the lawyers. For a few hours, everyone is just a soul in a body, drifting in the great, dark ocean of sleep. Think of the textures one last time. The softness of the silk. In the Middle Ages, masculinity was not about aggression or loud displays. It was a quality of weight, of gravity, and of deep, inner restraint. To be an ideal man was to be like a well-crafted cathedral, strong, upright, and immovable, with a soul that was reflected in the very way one stood and spoke. I want to reassure you that as we explore this tonight, nothing dramatic will happen. There are no battles here, no loud horns, and no sudden movements. We are simply observing a man in the quiet of his chamber, or a lord walking slowly through a great hall. We are looking at the textures of leather and steel, the coarseness of a beard, and the steady, calm light in a man's eyes. Take a deep breath in, feel the cool air. Breathe out, let your mind wander back with me to a room built of heavy oak and cold, gray stone. Imagine a knight's chamber, late at night. The walls are thick, perhaps 5 or 6 feet of solid stone, and they hold the chill of the evening. In the corner, a large hearth contains the glowing remains of a fire. The wood has burned down to embers that pulse with a soft orange light, like the heartbeat of the room. In the center of the room, standing on a wooden rack, is a suit of armor. In this half-light, the steel looks dark and liquid, reflecting the embers in long, distorted lines. It stands there like a silent sentinel, empty but filled with the memory of the man who wears it. Next to the armor, a man sits at a heavy wooden table. He is older, perhaps in the middle of his life. He is moving slowly, his hands wide and calloused, resting on the grain of the wood. This is our window into the medieval ideal of masculinity. For a man in the Middle Ages, the face was a map of his moral standing. We have talked about how beauty was seen as a reflection of the soul, and for men, this meant a face that showed mesure, a sense of balance and self-control. Look at his beard. The history of the medieval beard is a slow, shifting tide. At certain times, a clean-shaven face was the mark of a cleric or a man of deep religious devotion, a face that was open and vulnerable to God. But for the knight or the lord, the beard was often a symbol of his power and his maturity. Imagine the texture of that beard. It is not the perfectly groomed, short beard of today. It is thick and full, perhaps reaching down to the mid. In the firelight, you can see the different colors within it, the dark browns, the hints of gray, and the deep auburn. It feels coarse to the touch, like the wool of a mountain sheep. The ritual of caring for the beard was a quiet, daily meditation. A man would use a comb made of bone or antler, the teeth smoothed down by years of use. He would draw the comb through the hair, starting at the chin and moving slowly downward, scritch, Scritch. The sound is small and repetitive in the quiet room. He might use a tiny drop of oil perhaps, scented with cedar or bay leaf, to keep the hair from becoming too wild. A lion-like appearance was often the goal. The lion was the king of beasts, known not just for his strength, but for his dignity. A man with a thick mane of hair and a full beard was seen as someone who possessed that same royal gravity. He was a protector. He was a pillar. As you listen to the sound of the imaginary comb, let your own face relax. Feel the muscles in your jaw loosen. Imagine the weight of a long, heavy beard on your own chin, grounding you, pulling your head into a steady, upright position. Beyond the hair, there was the matter of posture. In the medieval world, the way a man carried his body was a direct reflection of his inner discipline. To slouch, to lean, or to move with jerky, hurried motions was seen as a sign of a weak character. It suggested a man who was not in control of his own spirit. The ideal man stood with rectitude. His spine was a straight line, reaching from the earth to the heavens. His shoulders were broad and set back, not in a display of pride, but as a sign that he was ready to carry the burdens of his people. Imagine this man walking across a stone floor. He does not rush. His steps are heavy and deliberate. Thump, thump. Each footfall is a statement of his presence. Because he wears heavy clothing, layers of linen, wool, and perhaps a leather point, his movements have a natural slowness. He moves like a great tree, swaying in a gentle wind. This posture was often trained from a young age. As a page and then a squire, a boy would be taught to stand still for hours, to carry heavy objects without straining, and to move with a grace that masked his strength. This was the concept of strength in restraint. A man who was truly strong did not need to flex his muscles or shout. He carried his strength in the stillness of his hands and the steadiness of his gaze. When he sat in a chair, he did not fidget. He sat like the stone of the castle itself, unmoving, patient, and enduring. Think of that stillness. Imagine yourself becoming that still. Your legs are heavy and relaxed. Your back is supported by your bed. Your hands are resting quietly at your sides. You have the strength of the medieval ideal, but it is a strength that is now directed toward the task of rest. You are a pillar of your own quiet world. We cannot talk about medieval masculinity without talking about armor. But we are not looking at armor as a weapon. We are looking at it as a second skin that defined the man's physical presence. Armor was the ultimate expression of masculine containment. Just as the lady was contained by her laces and her veils, the man was contained by steel and leather. Imagine the process of putting on a suit of Maltha. It is made of thousands of tiny iron rings, each one hand-riveted to its neighbor. It is cold to the touch, and it smells of oil and old metal. When the man lifts it, the mail makes a sound like 1,000 tiny bells. A soft, metallic shimmering noise. He pulls it over his head, and the weight of it settles onto his shoulders. It is heavy, perhaps 30 pounds of iron, but because it is flexible, it moves with him. It clings to his body, a cold, heavy embrace. Underneath, he wears a gambeson, a thick, quilted jacket stuffed with wool or linen. This padding softens the weight of the metal and provides warmth. The combination of the soft, quilted fabric and the hard, cold iron is the perfect metaphor for the medieval man, soft of heart and hard of purpose. As he sits in his room, he might take a piece of cloth and a bit of sand or oil to polish. A piece of plate armor, perhaps a gauntlet. Rub, rub. He watches the way the metal begins to glow, reflecting the orange light of the fire. He feels the smoothness of the steel, the way it has been hammered into a perfect curve to deflect a blow. The armor was not just for protection. It was a moral garment. It was shining because the man's soul was meant to be shining. A knight with rusted, dull armor was seen as a man who had let his spirit go to seed. The care he took with his equipment was a reflection of the care he took with his vows. As you lie there, Imagine that you are wrapped in a suit of invisible armor. It isn't heavy or cold. It is a light, protective shell that keeps out the worries of the day. It is a shell of peace. You are contained within your blankets, and nothing can reach you here. You are safe. You are held in a world of quiet strength. There was also a deep connection between a man's appearance and his sense of duty. In the Middle Ages, masculinity was not an individual achievement. It was a service. A man looked a certain way because he had a role to play in the great tapestry we spoke of before. The lord looked grand and heavy because he was the roof of the community. The monk was clean-shaven and tonsured because he was the window to the divine. The peasant was rugged and tanned because he was the foundation of the earth. This sense of duty brought a profound calm to a man's face. When you look at the statues of medieval knights on their tombs, the effigies, you see a face that is perfectly at peace. The eyes are closed, the hands are joined in prayer, and the expression is one of justified rest. They believed that if a man had lived according to his measure, if he had been strong but restrained, brave but humble, then his face would reflect that at the end. Imagine the man in our room now. He has finished his grooming. He has polished his steel. He stands up and walks to the window. The moon is high now, a silver coin hanging over the dark forest. He looks out over his lands, not with a sense of ownership, but with a sense of stewardship. He is the watchman. He feels the cool night air on his face, the same air that we are breathing now. It smells of damp earth, of pine needles, and of the coming frost. He takes a slow, deep breath, and his chest expands. He is a part of the night. He is a part of the stone. The medieval ideal of masculinity was a beauty of being. It wasn't about what a man did as much as who he was in the silence of his own heart. He was a man of his word, a man of his faith, and a man of his people. And that internal reality created an external beauty that was steady, dark, and deep as the fire in the hearth finally dies out. Leaving the room in a soft, velvety darkness, the man prepares for sleep. He removes his heavy cloak, the wool rustling softly as it is laid over a chest. He unbuckles his leather belt, the metal tongue of the buckle making a tiny clink as it hits the floor. He is tired, but it is a good tiredness. It is the tiredness of a man who has stood upright all day, who has carried the weight of his armor and his responsibilities without complaining. He climbs into his bed, the heavy linen sheets feeling cool and fresh against his skin. In their world, beauty was a sign of purity, a light that shone from within. But as that light began to dim, as the skin began to line and the hair began to silver, it wasn't just seen as a physical change. It was seen as a moral one. It was a story of the soul's journey through a fallen world. As we explore this, I want you to feel completely safe and relaxed. We are looking at these ideas with a soft, curious heart. There is nothing to fear in the passage of time here. We are simply observing the way a very old culture tried to make sense of the cycle of life. Breathe in the stillness. Breathe out the day. We are here, in the quiet corners of the past, and everything is as it should be. The mirror of the soul in the Middle Ages. The human body was often compared to an apple. Think of an apple hanging on a tree in late summer. When it is young, it is smooth, bright, and full of life. Its skin is taut and reflects the sun. But as the season turns to autumn and then to winter, the apple begins to change. It loses its moisture. Its skin begins to wrinkle and pull inward. It becomes smaller, more concentrated, and eventually, it returns to the earth. To the medieval mind, this was not just a biological process. It was a spiritual allegory. They believed that when God created the first humans, they were meant to be eternally young and beautiful. But after the fall from the garden, corruption entered the world. Aging was seen as the slow, visible manifestation of that corruption. Imagine a woman in her later years, sitting by a window. In our modern world, we might see her wrinkles as character lines or signs of a life well lived. But to her contemporaries, those lines were sometimes viewed as the traces of sin. It wasn't necessarily that she had done something wrong, but rather that her body was reflecting the general weight of living in a world that was no longer perfect. The moral weight of the face, smoothness, represented a soul that was still close to its divine origin. Wrinkles represented the folding of the soul under the weight of worldly cares. Gray hair, sometimes seen as the frost of the soul, a sign that the fire of youth was cooling as one approached the winter of life. As you listen, feel your own face becoming smooth. Let the muscles around your eyes and your mouth go soft. Imagine that any lines of worry or stress are simply being brushed away by a cool, gentle hand. In this moment, you are timeless. You are just a presence in the dark, existing in a space of perfect, unlined peace. Because beauty was so closely tied to morality, the fear of aging was profound. It wasn't just vanity. It was a fear of losing the light. A woman who saw a wrinkle in her silver mirror might feel a quiet chill, a reminder that the world was moving her toward a final, inevitable stillness. They called this memento mori, remember that you must die. This wasn't meant to be a terrifying thought, but a grounding one. However, in the realm of beauty, it led to a quiet, desperate struggle to hold on to the appearance of youth for as long as possible. Imagine the rituals performed in the dim light of a bedchamber. To hide the marks of age, women used ointments that were as much alchemy as they were medicine. They used bean water, water in which dried beans had been soaked to wash their faces, believing it would tighten the skin. They used snail slime, gathered from the garden after a rain, because of its cool, sticky consistency that seemed to fill in the tiny lines around the eyes. Think of the sound of a small ceramic jar being opened. Pop. The scent of rosewater and almond oil fills the air. The woman applies the cream with a slow, circular motion. Rub, rub. She is trying to iron out the map of her life. She is trying to stay in the summer of her years. Even as the leaves begin to turn brown outside her window, there was a particular fear of hollowness. As we age, the fat beneath the skin diminishes, leaving the face looking more skeletal. To the medieval person, this was a terrifying reminder of the skull beneath the skin. They would use plumpers, tiny pieces of sponge or cloth tucked into the cheeks to maintain that rounded, youthful look we talked about in the facial ideals. One of the most fascinating ways they attempted to hide age was through the control of expression. We have spoken before about the stillness of the medieval face, but this became even more vital. As one grew older, they understood, in a very practical way, that moving the face caused it to line. A woman who laughed loudly, or frowned deeply, or spoke with great passion, was marring her own canvas. To stay young was to stay silent. To stay beautiful was to stay unmoving. Imagine a noblewoman at a feast. She sits perfectly still. Her head is held high, supported by her stiff linen wimple. When she speaks, she moves only her lips, keeping her cheeks and her forehead as smooth as a frozen pond. This was her armor against the passing of time. She moved through the hall like a figure made of wax, her beauty preserved not by health, but by a profound and steady refusal to let the world move her. As you lie there, let yourself embrace that stillness. You don't need to move a single muscle. You are like a statue in a quiet cathedral, safe from the winds of time. The air in your room is still. Your blankets are still. Your heart is beating with a slow, heavy, and peaceful rhythm. The symbolism of the seasons. The medieval world lived in a constant cycle of seasons, and they saw their own lives mirrored in the earth. Spring, the time of the lily white. Youth. Summer, the time of the ripe and full. Beauty. Autumn, the time of the withering and the silvering. Winter, the final, quiet rest. There was a specific beauty attributed to autumn, but it was a beauty of a different kind. It was the beauty of while a young face was a blank page, an older face was a manuscript. but the manuscript was hard to read, and it carried the weight of the stories it told. There was a deep, quiet sadness in the transition from the light of the sun to the light of the moon. The moon reflects the sun's light, just as an older person reflects the beauty they once had. They were encouraged to turn their minds away from the mirror and toward the prayer book as they aged, replacing the vanity of the flesh with the beauty of the spirit. But the human heart has not changed in 1,000 years. Even as the monks preached against vanity, the ladies and lords still reached for the powders and the oils. They still looked at the young and felt a pang of longing for the days when their skin was as smooth as a fresh-cut apple. As the end of life approached, the focus on beauty took a very strange turn. It became about the ars moriendi, the art of dying. They believed that a person should die with a face that was calm and composed, showing that they were ready to meet their Creator, even in the final hours. The skin might be washed with vinegar and rosewater. The hair would be brushed and braided one last time. The body would be wrapped in a shroud of the finest, whitest linen. In death, they finally achieved the ultimate medieval ideal, a face that was perfectly still, perfectly pale, and completely free of the movement of the world. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, think of that final, perfect peace. It is not something to fear. It is a return to the stillness we have been seeking all night. The cycle of the seasons is a beautiful thing. The spring must give way to the autumn so that the world can rest and be born again. The history of aging in the Middle Ages is a story of how people tried to find meaning in the marks that life leaves on us. It is a story of snail, slime, and rosewater, of silent expressions and silver mirrors. It is a story of how we have always tried to stay in the light, even as the shadows grow long. The candle in the library is almost gone now. The flame is a tiny, blue bead, flickering one last time before it sinks into the wax. The room is almost dark. The books on the shelves are silent, their stories tucked away for the night. Feel the softness of your own skin. It is a living, breathing thing. It tells your story, and it is beautiful, because it is yours. You are here, in the present, safe and warm. The ideas of the past are just echoes now, soft murmurs that help us find our way to sleep. The world is quiet. The seasons are turning, far away. The stone walls are holding the night at bay. Breathe in, breathe out. You are unlined. You are peaceful. You are drifting. The lady in the tower has closed her eyes. The knight in the hall is dreaming of the forest. The monk in the cell has put down his pen. The history of beauty is a long, winding road, and tonight, we have reached the end of this particular path. We have looked at the skin, the face, the hair, the clothes, the masculinity, and finally, the quiet passing of time. Everything is in its place. Sleep now, sleep now, sleep. The apple is at rest. The soul is at peace. The night is your home. Sleep. The world begins in gray, before the sun has even thought of touching the horizon. The castle is a place of deep, cold silence. The stone walls hold the chill of the night, and the air smells of cold ash and lavender. In the great chamber, the lady stirs. Her bed is a fortress of warmth. Heavy wool hangings surround her, keeping the drafts at bay. She rises slowly. Her first contact with the world is the linen chemise, a long white garment that has been warmed by her body through the night. As she steps onto the floor, the dried rushes beneath her feet make a soft, hushing sound. Crush, hush, crush. The first beauty ritual of the day is the washing. A servant brings a wooden basin filled with water that has been gently warmed over the kitchen fires. It is infused with rosewater and dried lilies. The linen rub. She does not submerge herself. Instead, she takes a square of bleached linen. She dips it into the water and begins to rub her skin. Rub, rub, rub. The friction brings a faint, healthy pinkness to her arms and face. The forehead. Once her skin is clean, she sits before a small, polished silver mirror. Now begins the most patient task, the plucking of the hairline. One by one, with a pair of cold iron tweezers, she removes the hairs from the top of her brow. She is creating a high, clear expanse of skin, a shining forehead that suggests a vast and virtuous intellect. Click-pluck, click-pluck. The sound is tiny and rhythmic in the quiet room. The cerus. Next comes the application of the cerus, the white lead powder mixed with vinegar. She applies it with a slow, circular motion. It is cold, it is heavy. It masks the tiny imperfections of her skin, turning her face into a smooth, white mask of ivory. She moves as if in a dream, her movements unhurried and precise. By the time the first sliver of gold light hits the high, narrow window, her face is prepared. She is no longer just a woman. She is a symbol of the morning itself, pale, still, and clear, by the time the sun is high in the sky. The castle has come alive with the sounds of voices and the clatter of horses in the courtyard. But for the lady, midday is a time of profound stillness. She sits in the solar, a private room filled with the soft, golden light of the afternoon. The weight of her beauty is now physical. She is dressed in her kirtle and surcoat, layers of heavy wool and silk that have been laced so tightly that her breath is shallow and rhythmic. Her posture is a straight line, a pillar of discipline. The stillness of the mask, because of the thick layer of cerus on her face. She cannot indulge in wide smiles or furrowed brows. To move her face too much would be to crack the mask. She practices a studied calm. Her eyes move, but her face remains as still as the stone statues in the chapel. To keep her face looking youthful and rounded. The rosebud ideal, she might place small pieces of sponge or cloth in the hollows of her cheeks. It makes her speech soft and deliberate. Every word is a choice. The protection. If she must walk in the garden, she does so with a sense of mission. She wears a wide straw hat over her linen veil. She carries a parasol of silk. The sun is her enemy. Its golden touch is a threat to the pale, moral landscape of her skin. She walks slowly, her heavy skirts sweeping the gravel paths. Swish, swish, swish. The midday heat is kept at bay by the thick castle walls. Inside, it is always cool, always dim. She spends these hours in a state of meditation, perhaps embroidery, or reading a book of hours. The needle moves in and out of the silk. Stitch, pull, stitch, pull. The repetitive motion is a reflection of the repetitive nature of her beauty. It is something that must be maintained, second by second, through the long, bright hours of the day. As the sun begins to dip, the world turns a deep, dusty amber. The long shadows of the battlements stretch across the courtyard like the fingers of a giant. This is the hour of transition, when the public beauty of the day becomes the performative beauty of the night. The lady prepares for the evening meal. The morning's white mask is refreshed, a new layer of powder applied to catch the flickering light of the torches. But now, scent becomes the primary focus. In the medieval mind, a sweet scent was the physical manifestation of a sweet soul. To smell of the earth or the body was to be fallen. To smell of the garden was to be divine. The pomander. She takes her pomander, a silver sphere filled with a paste of ambergris, musk, and crushed cloves. She warms it in her hands, the heat of her palms releasing a heavy, spicy fragrance that clings to her silk sleeves. The oils. She rubs a drop of lavender oil into her temples and the insides of her wrists. The scent is sharp and clean, a contrast to the smoky air of the great hall. The hair. Though her hair remains hidden under her veil, she has washed it in a decoction of rosemary and ivy. When she moves her head, a faint, herbal freshness escapes the linen. She enters the great hall for dinner. The atmosphere is heavy with the smell of roasting meats, wood smoke, and the damp rushes on the floor. She sits at the high table, a figure of ivory and gold. The light of the torches reflects off her high, polished forehead. She eats slowly, her small mouth moving with minimal effort. She is a picture of temperance. To the observers in the hall, She is not just a person eating a meal. She is a vision of the social order, as steady and beautiful as the moon in the night sky. The feast is over. The music of the lutes has faded, and the guests have retreated to their chambers. The castle returns to its true state, a place of shadow and silence. The lady returns to her room, where a single beeswax candle burns on the table. Now begins the slow unmaking. This is perhaps the most hypnotic part of the day, a ritual of shedding the layers of the world. The unlacing, her servant stands behind her, undoing the long silk cords of her surcoat. You can hear the soft creak of the fabric and the hiss of the breath, leaving her lungs as the tension is released. The removal of the veil. The pins are removed one by one and placed in a wooden box. Tink, tink, tink. The veil is folded, its linen crisp and white. Finally, the wimple is taken away, revealing her neck and jaw. The hair, now, her hair is let down. It is a moment of profound release. The braids are undone, and the hair spills down her back, a heavy, dark mantle that has been trapped all day. She takes her bone comb and begins to brush. Brush, brush, brush. The sound is like the wind in the trees. Brush, brush, brush. She moves the comb from the roots to the very tips, which reach down to her waist. Brush, brush, brush. In the candlelight, her hair looks like liquid shadow. It is the only part of her beauty that is allowed to be wild, but even now, it is handled with a slow, meditative care. Finally, she addresses her face. She uses a soft cloth dipped in warm milk to wash away the sea. The white mask dissolves, revealing the skin beneath. Pale, tired, but clean. She applies a final treatment for the night, a thin glaze of egg white mixed with a drop of honey. As it dries, it tightens the skin, a silent sentry against the wrinkles of time. She climbs into her high bed. The linen sheets are cool. The heavy wool blankets are pulled up to her chin. She lies on her back, her head supported by a firm bolster to keep her face from rubbing against the fabric. The candle flickers. A thin ribbon of smoke rises into the darkness as the flame dies. The room is now a place of total, velvet blackness. The lady is at rest. Her skin is clean. Her hair is bound. Her soul is quiet. She has completed the day's work of being beautiful. She has maintained the order of the world through the discipline of her body. And now, she drifts into a sleep that is as deep and still as the stone walls that surround her. The history of a day is a history of small, repetitive actions. It is a story told in linen, powder, and the sound of a comb. As you feel yourself drifting now, imagine that you are in that same high bed. The world of the 21st century is gone. There are no lights, no noises, no demands. There is only the night. There is only the stillness. Everything is in its place. The mask is gone. The hair is free. And the day is finished. Sleep now. Sleep now. Sleep. The stone is cold. The heart is warm. The night is long. Sleep. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the air enter your lungs cool, steady, and certain. As you breathe out, imagine the last bit of tension leaving your fingers, your toes, and the space between your eyes. You are becoming a part of the stillness we have described. You are becoming a part of the history that is now ready to sleep. Think back, for a moment, to the skin we described, that pale, lily-white surface that was so carefully guarded. In your mind's eye, see a hand resting on a dark wooden table. It is a hand that has never known the bite of the frost or the burn of the noonday sun. It is a hand that represents a life of quietude and prayer. That hand is now still. It is tucked beneath a heavy wool blanket, safe from the world outside. The paleness that was once a statement of class and morality is now just a soft, moonlit glow in the darkness of a bedchamber. Recall the high, clear foreheads we saw, those vast expanses of skin that were polished and plucked to show the light of the intellect. In the dark, the forehead is the first thing to catch the light of the moon. It looks like a smooth white shell, reflecting the silver beams that filter through the narrow, unglazed windows. The shining quality that the medieval poets loved is still there, but it is no longer a performance. It is just a part of the quiet architecture of a face at rest. The eyebrows, those thin, arched lines like the strokes of a pen, are now relaxed. The eyes they framed are closed, the lids heavy and unmoving. The small, rosebud mouths are soft, releasing the slow, shallow breath of deep sleep. The mask of beauty, the cerus, the egg-white glaze, the faint pink of the crushed roots has done its work. It has protected the soul through the day, and now it is being slowly reclaimed by the night. In the corner of the room, the woman's hair is a dark, heavy shadow. We talked about how it was brushed by the firelight, the comb moving in long, rhythmic strokes. Brush, brush, brush. That sound is gone now, but the rhythm remains in the memory of the room. The hair is bound in a soft silk ribbon, its weight a comforting presence on the pillow. The rosemary and ivy she used to wash it still scent the air, a faint, herbal ghost that lingers in the folds of the hangings. Everything we have spoken of is now settling into the earth. Now, let your mind wander through the rest of the castle, watching the world fade into the night. In the great hall, the heavy oak tables have been cleared. The crumbs of the coarse bread have been swept away. The dogs that lay by the hearth have curled into tight circles, their heads resting on their paws, their breathing synchronized with the settling of the building. The fire is nothing but a bed of gray ash, with a single, tiny spark deep within that occasionally pulses like a distant star. The shadows in the hall are absolute. They fill the corners and wrap around the stone pillars, muffling the echoes of the day's voices. In the wardrobe, the clothes are at rest. Think of the heavy blue surcoat we described, dyed with woad and lined with silk. It hangs on a wooden peg, its long trailing sleeves draped like the wings of a sleeping bird. The wool is heavy, holding the scent of the wood smoke and the lavender. The laces that were pulled so tight to shape the body are now loose and limp. The garment is empty, but it still holds the shape of the person who wore it, a soft fabric memory of the day's discipline. The leather shoes are tucked under a bench. The silver girdle, with its heavy keys and pomander, lies on a chest, the metal cool and dark. The visual hierarchy we talked about, the laws of color and fern no longer matters. In the dark, the silk is no more than the wool. The crimson of the noble is the same as the russet of the peasant. The night is the great equalizer, a blanket of velvet that covers everyone with the same quiet dignity. Outside the walls, the village is equally still. The thatched roofs are dark mounds against the sky. The fields, where the sun-browned men and women worked, are empty and silvered by the frost. The tools, the plows, the scythes, the hoes are leaning against the barn walls, their iron cold and silent. The beauty of the earth, the beauty of the labor, is now resting beneath the soil, waiting for the spring. The whole world is a series of closed doors and extinguished lights. Now, let us turn our attention back to the light itself. Throughout our journey, we have been guided by the flame of a candle. It was the amber light that showed us the texture of the linen and the glint of the steel. But now, even that light must go. Imagine a single beeswax candle sitting on a stone ledge. The flame is small, a steady teardrop of gold and blue. It has burned down low, the wax pooling around its base in a smooth, translucent circle. The flame flickers slightly, not from a draft, but because it is reaching the end of its time. Watch that flame. It is the only thing moving in the entire castle. It dances, very slowly, casting a final, long shadow across the floor. It illuminates the grain of the wood, the pores of the stone, and the weave of the linen. And then, with a tiny silent sigh, the flame sinks into the wax. A thin gray ribbon of smoke rises from the blackened wick. It curls into the air, twisting and turning in the moonlight until it vanishes. The room is now dark, but it is not an empty darkness. It is a full, rich darkness, pregnant with the history of everything we have talked about. The stone walls are still there. You can feel their strength, their permanence. They have stood for hundreds of years, and they will stand for hundreds more. They are the guardians of the silence. They hold the cold of the winter and the memory of the summer. They are the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the past. The air in the room is cooling. It is a clean, sharp cold that makes the warmth of the blankets feel even more precious. You can feel that warmth now, creeping up from your feet to your shoulders. It is a heavy, soft warmth, like the fur-lined cloaks of the nobility. It is a warmth that says you are protected. You are drifting now. The images of the medieval world are becoming like a tapestry that is being slowly rolled up and put away. The image of the knight in his armor is fading. The steel is no longer bright. It is just a shape in the dark. The sound of his heavy footsteps has been replaced by the silence of the stone. The image of the lady at her mirror is fading. The silver mirror is covered by a cloth, its surface dark and still. The white powder is in its jar, the lid tightly closed. The image of the market square, the church bells, the laws of the land, they are all receding. They are moving back into the books, back into the earth, back into the long, slow dream of history. You are left here, in your own bed, in your own time. But the peace of the past is still with you. The boring history we have explored, the slow rituals, the repetitive tasks, the long hours of stillness has become a bridge to your own sleep. The medieval people knew that the night was a time for the soul to return to its source. They believed that in sleep, we are all made whole again. The marks of age, the stains of labor, the masks of beauty, they all fall away. We become simple again. We become quiet. Listen to the silence of your own room. It is the same silence that filled the castle in 1380. It is a silence that has no beginning and no end. It is a vast, soft ocean, and you are floating on its surface. Your breath is very slow now, in and out, in and out. The world is a very old place, and it knows how to take care of you. It has watched over countless nights, countless people, and countless dreams. It knows the rhythm of the rest. There is nothing more to learn tonight. There is nothing more to see. The story is finished. The history is at rest. The beauty is hidden in the dark dot. Imagine the last candle in the entire world being blown out. The smoke curls, the darkness settles, and the silence is absolute. You are a part of that silence. You are a part of that rest. The stone is cold. The wool is warm. The night is long. The history of beauty is the history of a soul trying to find its way home. And tonight, you have arrived. Everything is still. Everything is quiet. Everything is at peace. The medieval world has faded into the mist. The towers have vanished into the clouds. The lights are all gone. There is only the breath. There is only the dark. The tapestry is folded. The mirror is covered. The hair is bound. The sleep is here, deep, heavy, and silent. 1,000 years of rest are wrapped around you. The stone, the wood, the linen, quiet, slow, still. Sleep, sleep, sleep.